The rain hammered against the crumbling walls of the abandoned mosque as Ibrahim held his final piece of mouldy bread. His hands trembled, not from hunger, though he hadn't eaten in 3 days, but from what he was about to do. A figure stood in the doorway, not quite solid, not quite smoke, eyes that burned like embers in the darkness. "Give me half," the voice commanded, neither male nor female, echoing as if spoken from the bottom of a well. Why would a starving beggar give his last morsel to a creature that could take it by force? What did this Jinn reveal to Ibrahim in that moment that made him weep for 40 nights afterward? This story will send chills down your spine and change how you see mercy forever. Listen until the very end, because what happened next defied every law of this world and the next. Before I continue, please check if you're subscribed to this channel. Leave a comment telling me which country you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories of faith and mystery reach more hearts around the world. Now let me take you back to where this impossible tale began. Ibrahim wasn't always a beggar. 5 years ago, he had been a shopkeeper in the old quarter of Lahore, Pakistan. He had a small electronics shop, a modest apartment, and enough to feed his elderly mother and younger sister. Then the fire came. It started in the shop next door, an electrical fault, they said, and spread faster than anyone could react. Ibrahim's shop was consumed in minutes, but that wasn't the worst part. His mother, who had been visiting him that day, didn't make it out. The grief shattered him completely. His sister married and moved to Karachi. The insurance never paid out. Corruption, endless paperwork, doors slammed in his face. Within 6 months, Ibrahim had nothing. No home, no family nearby, no money, no hope. He ended up on the streets, sleeping in doorways, begging for scraps outside mosques. But even in his poverty, Ibrahim never missed a single prayer. He would perform wudu at public taps, pray on cardboard in alleyways, recite what he could remember of the Quran while others slept. The other beggars called him the fool who still prays. The abandoned mosque became Ibrahim's shelter during the monsoon season. No one else would go near it. The locals whispered that it was occupied, that strange sounds came from within after midnight, that shadows moved against walls where no one stood, that those who entered sometimes didn't leave quite the same. But Ibrahim had nowhere else to go, and honestly, he was too tired to fear anything anymore. What could spirits do to him that life hadn't already done? The mosque itself was ancient, dating back to the Mughal era. Its walls were cracked, its dome partially collapsed, its courtyard overgrown with weeds. The mihrab, the prayer niche, was still intact though, and that was all Ibrahim cared about. He could face Mecca. He could pray. That was enough. For 3 weeks, nothing unusual happened. Ibrahim would spend his days begging at traffic lights, collecting barely enough for one meal. He'd share whatever he got with the stray dogs that roamed the area. Then he'd return to the mosque at night, pray Isha and Tahajjud, and sleep on the cold stone floor. On the 22nd night, everything changed. Ibrahim had earned almost nothing that day, just 5 rupees from a young student who looked embarrassed to give so little. With those 5 rupees, Ibrahim bought the cheapest thing he could find, a small piece of naan bread from a vendor who was throwing out the day's leftovers. That bread, dry, hard, barely edible, was going to be his only meal for the next 2 days until he could beg again. He returned to the mosque as the call to Aisha prayer echoed from nearby mosques. He performed his ablution at the broken fountain, prayed, and sat down in the corner with his precious piece of bread. That's when he heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the darkness near the collapsed section of the dome. Ibrahim's heart hammered as the footsteps grew closer. He squinted into the shadows, his piece of bread forgotten in his hands. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shakier than he'd intended. "This is a house of Allah. If you mean harm, you're in the wrong place." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was only silence and the sound of rain drumming on what remained of the roof. Then the figure emerged. It was humanoid, but wrong in ways Ibrahim's mind struggled to process. Sometimes it seemed to be an old man in tattered robes. Other times it flickered, becoming smoke, becoming shadow, becoming something with too many angles and eyes that shouldn't exist. The air around it shimmered with heat, despite the cool monsoon rain. "You pray here every night," the being said. Not a question, a statement. Its voice sounded like wind through hollow trees, like water over stones, like fire crackling. All at once, Ibrahim's throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He managed to whisper, "Yes, I have nowhere else." The being moved closer, and now Ibrahim could see its eyes clearly. They glowed with a dim orange light, like coals in a dying fire. But there was something in them, not malice exactly, but a deep, ancient weariness. "I have watched you," it continued. "You give food to dogs. You pray even when you have nothing. You thank Allah for a piece of stale bread." The being tilted its head. "Why?" "Because," Ibrahim swallowed hard, "because everything comes from him, even suffering, even this." The being was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke words that would haunt Ibrahim forever. "Give me half of your bread." It wasn't a request, but it also wasn't quite a command. It was a test, Ibrahim realized, but a test of what? His hands trembled as he looked down at the small piece of naan, his only food, his survival for the next 2 days. Half would leave him even hungrier, weaker, more desperate. But something in those ancient, weary eyes made him understand. This being didn't need his bread. It wanted to see what he would choose. With shaking hands, Ibrahim tore the bread in half. The being took the half piece of bread with hands that seemed to shift between solid flesh and wisps of smoke. For a moment it simply held it, staring at the torn bread as if it were something precious and incomprehensible. "You would feed a jinn when you are starving," it said softly. "Why?" "Because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught us to share what we have, even if it's little," Ibrahim replied, his voice steadier now. "And the Quran tells us that jinn are also Allah's creation. If you're hungry—" "I do not eat," the jinn interrupted. "I have not needed food for 300 years. Ibrahim felt confusion wash over him. "Then why?" "Because I needed to know if humans like you still exist." The jinn's form solidified slightly, becoming more clearly defined as an elderly figure, with a long white beard and eyes that held centuries of pain. "My name is Rashid. I have lived in this mosque since it was built in 1642. I have watched it rise in glory and fall to ruin. I have watched humans forget what mercy means." Rashid sat down across from Ibrahim, and the temperature in the mosque seemed to drop several degrees. "Do you know why this mosque was abandoned?" Ibrahim shook his head. 70 years ago, a wealthy merchant wanted this land to build a hotel. The imam at the time refused to sell, so the merchant spread rumors that the mosque was haunted, that jinn lived here, that it was cursed. Rashid's voice turned bitter. "He was right about the jinn. I do live here, but I never harmed anyone. I protected this place. I kept the walls from collapsing completely. I drove away thieves who tried to steal the copper from the dome." "But people believed the rumors," Ibrahim said quietly. "They always do. Fear is easier than faith." Rashid looked at the piece of bread in his hand. Eventually the congregation dwindled. The imam grew old and died. No one came to pray anymore. The mosque fell into disrepair, and I remained alone, watching over a house of Allah that Allah's own people had abandoned. Thunder rumbled overhead. Rain leaked through the broken dome, creating small pools on the stone floor. "For 70 years people have come to this mosque only out of desperation," Rashid continued. "Homeless, addicts, criminals hiding from police. Some tried to burn it down. Others used it as a toilet. Not one showed respect. Not one prayed." His eyes locked onto Ibrahim's. "Until you." Ibrahim didn't know what to say. He simply sat there, holding his half piece of bread, trying to process that he was having a conversation with a 300-year-old jinn who had been protecting an abandoned mosque for 7 decades. "What happens now?" Ibrahim finally asked. Rashid smiled, a sad, ancient smile. "Now we eat together, and then I repay a debt that has been owed for longer than you can imagine." Over the next hour, as the rain continued its relentless drumming, Rashid told Ibrahim stories that seemed impossible, yet felt undeniably true. He spoke of the mosque's golden years, when thousands would gather for Jummah prayer, when scholars would debate Quranic interpretation in the courtyard, when the call to prayer would echo across the entire old quarter. He described the calligrapher who had inscribed Quranic verses on the walls, verses that were now barely visible under decades of grime and weather damage. "That calligrapher was my friend," Rashid said quietly. "Hassan Ali, a human who could see jinn. We would sit together after Isha prayer, and he would teach me deeper meanings of the Quran. He never feared me. He said we were both students of the same teacher." Ibrahim listened, fascinated. "But why are you here? Why didn't you leave when the mosque was abandoned?" "Because I made a promise." Rashid's form flickered, becoming more transparent. "When this mosque was built, the original imam, a man named Yusuf, made a covenant with my family. We Jinn would protect the mosque from physical harm, and in return, we could live in peace within its walls, praying alongside humans. It was rare, Jinn and humans worshipping together, but it worked. So you've been keeping that promise even though humans broke theirs? A promise made before Allah is eternal, Rashid said simply. Humans forgot. I did not. Ibrahim felt ashamed, not for himself, but for humanity. Here was a being that people feared and vilified, yet it had more integrity than most humans he'd known. But I've been watching you, Ibrahim, Rashid continued. Every night you come here, you pray with sincerity, you thank Allah for scraps. You share what little you have with stray animals. You never complained, never cursed your fate, never blamed Allah for your suffering. What good would complaining do? Ibrahim replied. Allah tests whom He loves. This is my test. Rashid stood up, and suddenly his form became more solid, more powerful. The air around him shimmered with energy. You passed a test tonight that you didn't even know you were taking. When I asked for half your bread, I was asking if you would show mercy to someone you feared, someone who could take everything from you by force, and you chose compassion. Ibrahim felt something shift in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. 300 years ago, a human showed me the same mercy, Rashid said, his voice heavy with emotion. I was injured, weak, hunted by other Jinn who wanted to claim this territory. Imam Yusuf found me and offered sanctuary. He shared his food with me. He prayed for my healing. He taught me that mercy transcends the boundaries between our worlds. Rashid knelt down beside Ibrahim, and for the first time, Ibrahim saw tears in the Jinn's eyes, tears that evaporated into steam as they fell. I have waited 300 years to repay that debt, Rashid whispered, and tonight Allah sent me someone worthy. What are you saying? Ibrahim's voice was barely audible over the rain. Rashid placed his hand, now fully solid and surprisingly warm, on Ibrahim's shoulder. I am saying that your suffering ends tonight, but first, you must understand something about Jinn and the debts we carry. The Jinn stood and began to pace, his form shimmering between states of matter. When a Jinn receives true mercy from a human, not out of obligation or fear, but from genuine compassion, a spiritual debt is created, not a debt that demands repayment, but one that calls for it. It echoes through time until it can be honored. Imam Yusuf never asked for anything, Rashid continued. He showed me mercy because it was right, not because he expected reward. But in the world of Jinn, such acts create ripples that last for centuries. I have carried that debt, that blessed, beautiful debt, for 300 years, waiting for the right moment, the right person. Ibrahim shook his head, overwhelmed. But I'm nobody. I'm just a beggar who— You are a man who prays in an abandoned mosque, Rashid interrupted firmly. You are a man who shares his last meal with a creature he fears. You are a man who has lost everything yet still thanks Allah. Do you think such people are common? Do you think Allah doesn't notice? The Jinn moved to the mihrab, the prayer niche that still held faint traces of ancient calligraphy. He touched the wall gently, and suddenly the Arabic letters began to glow with a soft golden light. Before I tell you what I'm going to do, Rashid said, you need to know the truth about why you lost everything 5 years ago. Ibrahim's heart clenched. What truth? The fire that destroyed your shop. It wasn't an accident. Rashid's voice turned cold. The owner of the neighboring shop hired someone to start it. He wanted your property because it had street access that his didn't. He thought insurance would cover your loss, that you'd rebuild elsewhere. He never intended for your mother to be there that day. The words hit Ibrahim like physical blows. No, that can't be. His name is Mahmoud Hassan. He lives in a mansion now, built on the blood money he made from expanding his business onto your property. He bribed the insurance investigators. He paid the police to close the case. He has spent 5 years sleeping peacefully while you suffered on the streets. Ibrahim felt a rage he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. His hands clenched into fists. His breathing became ragged. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because you need to make a choice, Rashid said quietly. I can give you 2 gifts tonight, but only 2. Choose wisely. The Jinn held up one finger. First gift, I can restore what you lost. Money, property, business, respect. I can make you wealthy beyond your dreams. I can give you a life of comfort and ease. He held up a second finger. Second gift, I can bring justice. I can ensure that Mahmoud Hassan faces consequences for what he did. Not death. I cannot take a life, but ruin. He will lose everything, just as you lost everything. His crimes will be exposed. His empire will crumble. Ibrahim stared at the Jinn, his mind reeling. Or, Rashid said softly, holding up a third finger, third gift. I can rebuild this mosque. I can restore it to its former glory, make it a beacon of faith again. Fill it with worshippers. Bring life back to a house of Allah that has stood empty for 70 years. But you said 2 gifts, Ibrahim whispered. I did. You can choose wealth and justice. Take back what was stolen and punish the thief. Or you can choose wealth and the mosque, secure your future and restore Allah's house. Or you can choose justice and the mosque, punish evil and rebuild holiness, but remain poor yourself. Rashid's eyes burned with intensity. But you cannot have all 3. That is the limitation of the debt I carry. 2 wishes, no more. Choose carefully, Ibrahim. This moment will define the rest of your life. The rain stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for Ibrahim's answer. Ibrahim looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, permanently dirty no matter how much he washed them. These were the hands that once handled electronics, that once held his mother's hand, that now begged for coins and shared scraps with dogs. Can I ask you something first? Ibrahim's voice was hoarse. Of course. If I choose wealth, would it be halal? Would it come from permissible means? Rashid smiled, a genuine smile this time. You worry about halal and haram even now. Yes, Ibrahim, any wealth I give you would come through lawful means. Investments, opportunities, business ventures that succeed through genuine work. I cannot create money from nothing. That would be haram. But I can guide you to opportunities that exist, open doors that are currently closed, place you in the right place at the right time. Ibrahim nodded slowly. And justice? How would it come? Through truth. The evidence of Mahmoud Hassan's crimes still exists. Documents, witnesses he paid off who carry guilt, digital records he thought were deleted. I would ensure these reach the right authorities. The justice system would do the rest. No supernatural revenge, just truth brought to light. And the mosque? I would call upon other jinn who owe me favors. Together we would work through human hands, inspiring architects to volunteer, moving the hearts of wealthy donors, guiding skilled craftsmen to offer their services. The restoration would be real, physical, done by human hands, motivated by divine inspiration. It would take time, perhaps 2 years, but it would be genuine. Ibrahim stood up and walked to the broken fountain in the courtyard. The rain had filled it with fresh water. He performed wudu, washing his hands, face, arms, head, feet. The cold water helped him think. Behind him, Rashid waited in patient silence. Ibrahim prayed 2 rakats of istikhara, the prayer for guidance in decision-making. He recited Surah Al-Fatiha and Surah Al-Ikhlas, asking Allah to guide him toward the right choice. When he finished, he sat for a long moment, his forehead still pressed to the cold stone. Images flooded his mind. His mother's face, the shop in flames, 5 years of hunger and humiliation, Mahmoud Hassan sleeping in his mansion, this beautiful mosque crumbling into dust, the other beggars who shared his streets, the stray dogs he fed, the young student who had given him 5 rupees with an embarrassed smile. Slowly, Ibrahim stood up and turned to face Rashid. I've made my choice, he said quietly. The jinn's form seemed to solidify completely, becoming fully present in a way he hadn't been before. Speak it aloud. Once spoken, it cannot be changed. Ibrahim took a deep breath. I choose. He paused, and in that pause the weight of every decision he'd ever made seemed to press down on him. Wealth would end his suffering. Justice would give him closure. The mosque would serve hundreds, maybe thousands, but he could only have 2. I choose, Ibrahim repeated, his voice stronger now. The mosque and justice. Rashid's eyes widened. You would remain poor, even knowing that wealth could end your suffering. Allah provided for me with a piece of bread when I had nothing, Ibrahim said, tears streaming down his face. If he wants me to have wealth, he will provide it in his own way and time. But that man, Mahmoud Hassan, his crimes can't remain hidden. And this mosque, this beautiful house of Allah, it deserves to stand proud again. You would sacrifice your own comfort for principle? Rashid's voice held something like awe. My comfort is temporary. Justice and faith are eternal. Ibrahim wiped his eyes. I've survived 5 years on the streets. I can survive however many more years Allah wills. But I cannot stand before him on Judgment Day, knowing I chose my own ease over what was right. For a long moment, Rashid simply stared at him. Then slowly the Jinn bowed, a gesture of profound respect. "In 300 years, Rashid whispered, I have never met a human like you." Rashid straightened, and suddenly his entire form blazed with golden light. The temperature in the mosque spiked, then dropped, then stabilized at a comfortable warmth. The very air seemed to vibrate with power. "Then let it be done," the Jinn declared, his voice resonating with an authority that made the walls tremble. "By the mercy shown to me 3 centuries ago, by the mercy you showed tonight, and by the will of Allah who commands justice and charity, let these gifts be granted." He raised his right hand toward the sky. "For the mosque, I call upon my debt holders. Tariq of the mountains, you owe me a favor from 1847. I claim it now. Inspire the heart of architect Fahad Malik to dream of this place. Make him obsessed with its restoration. Samira of the winds, you owe me sanctuary I provided in 1923. I claim it now. Whisper to the wealthy widow Nusrat Begum about the abandoned mosque that needs her late husband's charity. Khalid of the earth, you owe me protection during the great earthquake of 1935. I claim it now. Guide construction workers to volunteer their skills. Make them feel drawn to this project as if it's their own salvation." As Rashid spoke each name, the air shimmered with different colors: emerald green, sapphire blue, ruby red. Other Jinn were answering the call, though Ibrahim couldn't see them. He could only feel their presence, like pressure changes before a storm. "For justice," Rashid continued, raising his left hand, "I call upon truth itself. Let the USB drive that Mahmoud Hassan's accountant hid in his office wall be found during the renovation he's planning next month. Let the guilt that eats at his paid witness, Asif Khan, finally overwhelm him into confession. Let the fire inspector who accepted the bribe, now dying of cancer, unburden his conscience by revealing what he knows. Let truth cascade like dominoes, unstoppable and inevitable." The golden light intensified until Ibrahim had to shield his eyes. He heard sounds, whispers in languages he didn't understand, wind that came from nowhere, the rustle of papers that didn't exist, voices promising and agreeing and binding themselves to oaths. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The light faded. The sounds ceased. Rashid stood before him, looking somehow diminished, as if the act had cost him greatly. "It is done," the Jinn said quietly, swaying slightly. "The wheels are in motion. Within 3 months, Mahmoud Hassan will be arrested. Within 6 months, this mosque will begin its restoration. Within 2 years, it will be fully restored and filled with worshippers again." Ibrahim fell to his knees, overwhelmed. "But what about you? You look—" "Calling in those debts took most of my remaining power," Rashid admitted, sitting down heavily. "I am old, Ibrahim. Even for a Jinn, I am ancient. I have lived in this mosque for 300 years, and I am tired. Will you die? Jinn don't die the way humans do. But yes, I will fade. Return to the fire from which I was created. Become part of the greater whole again." Rashid smiled peacefully. "It's not death, it's rest, and I'm ready. But this is your home." It was. "But every story ends, Ibrahim. Mine ends knowing that I kept my promise to Imam Yusuf, that I found one more human worthy of mercy, that this mosque will stand for centuries more because of the choice you made tonight." The Jinn reached out and placed his hand on Ibrahim's head. "A blessing. Your story, however, is just beginning." The first consequence came exactly 17 days later. Ibrahim was begging at his usual traffic light when a car stopped, not for the light, but specifically for him. A well-dressed woman in her 60s rolled down her window. "Are you the one who prays at the old Mughal mosque?" she asked. Ibrahim was startled. Yes. How did you—" "I had a dream," she said, and her eyes were intense. 3 nights in a row, a voice told me to find you, to ask you about the mosque. Is it true it needs restoration?" This was Nusrat Begum, the wealthy widow Rashid had mentioned. Though she didn't know about Jinn or debts or supernatural interventions, she only knew that she couldn't stop thinking about that abandoned mosque, that she woke up every morning with an inexplicable urge to save it. She hired surveyors, architects, historians. She discovered the mosque's significance. She committed her late husband's fortune to its restoration. The second consequence came 32 days later. Mahmoud Hassan was conducting a routine office renovation when a construction worker's sledgehammer broke through a wall and revealed a hollow space. Inside, a USB drive sealed in plastic, hidden 15 years ago by an accountant who had grown a conscience but lacked the courage to act. That USB drive contained everything: bribery records, arson plans, insurance fraud documentation, names, dates, amounts. The accountant, now dying of a terminal illness, decided he wanted to die with a clear conscience. He went to the police. The fire inspector, also dying of cancer, did the same. The paid witness, Asif Khan, couldn't sleep anymore. Every night he saw Ibrahim's mother in his dreams, asking why he'd lied. He broke down and confessed. It wasn't supernatural. It was truth, doing what truth always does when it's finally allowed to surface. It floods everything. Mahmoud Hassan was arrested on 63 counts of fraud, arson, bribery and manslaughter. His assets were frozen. His mansion was seized. His empire crumbled exactly as Rashid had promised. But the third consequence, the one Ibrahim never expected, came 94 days later. Fahad Malik, the architect obsessed with the mosque's restoration, needed someone who knew the building intimately, someone who had spent time there, someone who understood its spiritual significance. "I hear you've been living there," Fahad said when he found Ibrahim. "I need a guardian, someone to oversee the project, to ensure it's done with respect. I can't pay much, but I can pay. Room, board, and a small salary. Will you help me bring this place back to life?" Ibrahim stared at the man, remembering Rashid's words. "If Allah wants you to have wealth, He will provide it in His own way and time." This wasn't wealth, but it was enough. More than enough. It was purpose. 2 years later, the mosque stood magnificently restored. Its dome gleamed in the sunlight. Its walls were covered with freshly painted Quranic calligraphy. Its courtyard was filled with worshippers, young and old, rich and poor, all coming together for Friday prayers. Ibrahim, now the mosque's caretaker, stood in the back, watching with tears in his eyes. He was no longer homeless. He lived in a small apartment attached to the mosque. He was no longer hungry. The mosque committee provided for him. He was no longer forgotten. The community knew him, respected him, brought him food and gifts on Eid. But more than that, he had purpose. Every day, he maintained the mosque. He welcomed visitors. He told them the history. And sometimes late at night when he was alone, he would sit by the old fountain and tell Rashid about everything that had happened. He didn't know if the Jinn could still hear him. Rashid had faded away 3 days after their conversation, dissolving into golden mist that evaporated into the morning light. But Ibrahim liked to think that maybe, somehow, Rashid was still present, still watching, still protecting. Mahmoud Hassan was in prison, serving a 20-year sentence. His victims, including Ibrahim, had received compensation from his seized assets. Ibrahim had donated his entire share to the mosque restoration fund. Nusrat Begum had become like a mother to him. She visited weekly, attended prayers, and had started a program to help homeless people find shelter and work. Fahad Malik, the architect, had become a close friend. They would sit together after Isha prayer, discussing philosophy and faith, much like Rashid and Hassan Ali, the calligrapher, had done centuries ago. The mosque was alive again. Children ran through its courtyard during Quran classes. Scholars debated gently in its halls. The call to prayer echoed 5 times daily, reaching across the old quarter, reminding people that this house of Allah was open again. And every night before sleeping, Ibrahim would return to the same spot where he'd sat with his piece of bread 2 years ago. He would sit there and remember the Jinn who had tested him, trusted him, and changed his life forever. "Thank you, Rashid," he would whisper. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see in myself. Thank you for the test. Thank you for the choice. Thank you for letting me choose correctly." The fountain bubbled gently as if responding, and sometimes, just sometimes, on quiet nights when no one else was around, Ibrahim would see a shimmer in the air, a flicker of golden light, the suggestion of a figure watching over the mosque, keeping his 300-year-old promise to protect this sacred space. "Jinn don't die," Rashid had said. "They fade. They return to the greater whole." But maybe, Ibrahim thought, maybe a part of them remains in the places they loved, in the promises they kept, in the mercy they were shown. What does this story teach us? What should you take away from the tale of Ibrahim and Rashid? First, mercy costs you nothing but returns everything. Ibrahim had 1 piece of bread. He could have refused. He could have argued. But he chose compassion over self-preservation. And that single act of mercy, given to a being he feared, changed his entire destiny. The Quran tells us in Surah Ar-Rahman, "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? Everything is a favor, even the tests, even the suffering." Ibrahim understood this truth when he had nothing. Second, the right choice is rarely the easy choice. Ibrahim could have chosen wealth and justice. No one would have blamed him, but he chose the harder path, remaining poor while restoring a mosque and seeking justice for others. That's the difference between selfishness and selflessness. Third, what you do when no one is watching defines you. Ibrahim prayed in an abandoned mosque because it was right, not because anyone praised him. He fed dogs because they were hungry, not because people noticed. Rashid had watched him for 3 weeks before revealing himself. Character isn't what you perform for an audience, it's what you do in the darkness when only Allah sees. Fourth, we share this world with beings we don't understand, and they deserve respect. Jinn exist. The Quran confirms it. But they're not all evil. Some, like Rashid, are believers who keep their promises and honor their debts. Fear them if you must, but don't disrespect them. Don't dismiss them. Allah created them for a reason. Finally, the house of Allah should never stand empty. How many mosques have we abandoned? How many sacred spaces have we let fall to ruin because we built newer, fancier ones? Rashid waited 70 years in an empty mosque, keeping his promise while humans forgot theirs. We should be ashamed, and we should do better. Ibrahim's story reminds us that when we choose faith over comfort, mercy over revenge, service over selfishness, Allah provides in ways we cannot imagine. Before you go, I want you to do something. Look at your own life. What choice are you avoiding? What mercy are you withholding? What promise have you broken? Maybe you can't restore a mosque. Maybe you don't have jinn debts to call in, but you have something, a talent, resources, time, compassion. What will you do with it? Subscribe to this channel if these stories move you. Leave a comment telling me, have you ever sacrificed something important for a principle? What happened? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is always worth it. Because somewhere, someone is watching. Maybe it's a jinn. Maybe it's an angel recording your deeds. Maybe it's Allah himself, testing you with a piece of bread and a stranger in need. How you respond to that test will define not just your life, but your eternity. Assalamu alaikum. May peace, mercy, and blessings be upon you all. And may you always choose compassion over comfort, because that's when miracles happen.